Sound, emotion, experimentation, breastises. These are all words you can associate with the composition that accompanied season 3 of The Wheel of Time. And when I found out that Nick Hill, fellow booktuber, was actually working on the show helping develop this music, I figured, hey, you'd probably be a pretty good interview. So I asked if you'd like to sit down and give us a little bit of an insight into what it was like to work on The Wheel of Time, and I'm so happy to say he said yes. If you'd like to check out Nick Hill's content, which I recommend you do, he's done compositions for series also like Dresden Files and His Dark Materials. I will have both his booktube and music channel linked down below. But without any further ado, let's get into our conversation. Cool. So if you don't mind, I'll just go ahead and jump off, start chatting away and get hacking at it. I'm honestly pretty nervous about this because you're amazing and what you do is so freaking cool.
Oh man, you're so kind. I honestly, I felt the same, coming on stream with you because, I've watched you for now since 2019.
Do you mean on the channel or like through a window?
So, it is better to clarify those things. Yeah, when you had your old intro with the whistling music.
That band offered for me to use their song for free. And I was like, yeah, sure, thank you so much. And I used it for like years.
Yeah,
And then I changed it after a long time because that's just what you
sure.
do. And then I like looked up the band to like reach out to them again and be like, hey, like no offense, I just wanted to try something fresh. And then I saw they broke up and I was like, oh no.
Damn.
That's so sad.
I really do love the new intro music as well, though.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the that was another booktuber made that for me. He Kronk is what I call him. He's a wonderful guy.
Oh, Kronk, yeah.
Yeah, he just released his own series that I'm actually planning on reading as well. He read my books. I'll read his books. We'll get into it. We'll trash each other. It'll be wonderful.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Like, I'm sure you're in the music space, so you get similar like issues where, if you put out a book, you put out a song. When people just tell you like, "Oh, everything's great," that's useless. That's so not the feedback you want at all.
No, I completely agree. I usually, before I release anything, like I have a couple of trusted friends that I'll kind of shoot it over to, and they always help me hear things that I don't know if you have the same thing where it's like a writing fatigue. I know for me it's like hearing fatigue. After hearing the same thing over and over again, you just start to lose perspective.
I've written the same sentence like 40 times and it gets to the point where I'm like, these are not words. This is gobbledygook. And I'm sure it's the same with notes and music. Like your brain just can't reprocess
100%.
stuff. I'll hand it off to like a beta reader and like I had a book I handed a beta reader to and he just went no notes. And I was like, that's really no notes? I'd have notes on Lord of the Rings, man. Are you kidding me? Like, what are you talking about?
100%. The people who give you constructive criticism, they're your allies because you both want the same thing, which is it to be the best it can possibly be.
Yeah, and there's unconstructive criticism is where it crosses the line, which we all know exists. And there's people who are they just suck and they want to hate everything, and it's like, all right, whatever.
Yeah.
But I've found, at least in my circles, fortunately, I've cultivated a good group of people who are willing to be like, no, your first book was ass, so let's improve. That's actually a nice transition to my first question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So you are actually, I'm going to hit on this first because you're a booktuber as well, and you started putting out some content around there. And I did some perusing on your channel, and I see you've not only done songs for Wheel of Time, but you've taken inspiration with the likes of Dresden Files. And is that like going to be a continued series on your channel where you just kind of read a book, maybe get inspired by it, start composing for it? Is that something you're going to regularly do?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, for me, and I know this is very different for a lot of other people who work in film or media, is
Mhm.
reading is a second hobby for me to
Mhm.
music, and it always comes at a close second. And I remember in 2019, this was around when I first discovered your channel and when I first discovered the Wheel of Time. And I was thinking to myself that there's always an opportunity cost with all these things. If you work on music for long hours, there's very gratifying, obviously, to work on something that you love so deeply. But then it takes away from stuff that other things you love, like reading, and then vice versa, right? And so I had this crazy idea of like, what if I could combine both those things into one thing? Then it would be the best of all worlds. And so, hence, I kind of long answer was I discovered the Wheel of Time and I started reading the first book, and I was like, I wonder if, there's so many characters. I hadn't really experienced fantasy that much before then. I'd read The Hobbit and I'd read Harry Potter, and that's about it. I was like, there's so many characters, so many locations. I would love to see if somebody's done any deep dives on this on YouTube. And then I immediately found your channel. And so I started going down the rabbit hole with that, and it kind of formulated my love of not only the medium but the community around the medium, which I think actually makes the medium stronger. I do feel like it took my love of my new discovered love of fantasy and the Wheel of Time specifically, and kind of made me realize, oh, there's a whole community out there of people who love fantasy. What other fantasy is out there? Oh, they're about a wizard who lives in Chicago. That could be fantasy as well. Like, I didn't know any of these things. So it was kind of that discovery. And the way I express something I'm excited about is through music. So once I did the Wheel of Time kind of piece, and I worked with the Budapest Orchestra to record it and everything, which was an amazing experience. And I said, I want to do more of that. And so even if I'm not pitching on a project, if I have some free time between projects and I really like a series or something, I want to do a love letter to it musically in the way that I know how. And it's been really fun. I mean, through that booktube channel, which I started called Shelf Esteem, because I need to put a pun wherever I go. Um, so with that, I actually got a chance to meet Philip Chase, who's a wonderful fantasy channel, right? And he commissioned me to do a piece for the Idan trilogy, his book series, through which was in conjunction with his Broken Binding release. So it's really been just an amazing discovery of combining these different worlds, different mediums, and BookTube was just kind of another capstone on that, another chance to meet cool people and combine all these loves together, I guess you could say.
It's kind of a beautiful thing because you have the power that I know so many book nerds want. Because all these people, they'll be reading a book, and I know countless readers who will make a playlist for a book and be like, "This is what I listen to when I read First Law or whatever." You're one of the few people who can go, "No, I can make it. Like I'm going to make the sound that I feel is right." That's so cool. And you've also jumped the gun. Most YouTubers, they don't get a second channel for a while. You're like, "No, no, no. We're going in guns blazing."
I'm like, anything I do, I have to dive off the deep end. That's just like always my favorite thing to do. And also, to the point of music, as far as music written for a medium, I think it's like there's even many different layers of that. You could write fantasy that could work for, say, First Law, but what would the sound, the grime of that place, feel like in the music, where you feel like this could almost be music that belongs in world? That's like another layer to explore. So it's kind of like the only way to find that out is read all the books, right?
I also would be kind of afraid to show that side of it, which like kudos to you for being able to do it. Because like for me, for like the sound of First Law, I've always imagined like a kind of muddy Victorian kind of thing. But is someone going to be like, "Oh, that's cool," or is someone going to be like, "That's dumb. Joe Abercrombie said it sounds like this. You're an
Right,
idiot."
right.
Like I'm so afraid to just like get totally rejected. But I have the music taste of a trash animal, so there's nothing here. So for those people who are not aware, you also are working on the Wheel of Time show, which is just incredible. And if you wouldn't mind kind of giving us the story of how you managed to get on that team, did they reach out to you? Was it something where you were pitching them? Like, how did that relationship form?
Yeah, totally. I mean, full credit to Lauren Balfe for kind of making this dream come true, really. But basically, what happened was, around book two of the Wheel of Time, that was when the whole Falme sequence, the last third of the Great Hunt, and I remember the feeling I got while reading that, and it was literally like my mind was expanding in real time. Like, there's just those few watershed moments, I think, in reading experience where you feel like I can feel myself changing as a person. I
Yeah.
don't know if that makes sense. Sometimes you're not aware of it while it's happening, but I really felt it viscerally, and I wanted to capture what I felt. So, this melody came to my mind, and so I was like, I should just record this, and it was kind of more of a mental exercise because at the time I was trying to figure out, how do I level up as a composer? How do I get better at pitching myself? Because that's always another aspect of composing that oftentimes composers have to really work at. We're spending long hours in the room working on our craft, but then there's the other side of it. So I figured, why don't I try pitching for a show that I have no business pitching for, just as a mental experiment, thought experiment, that I didn't have the credits at the time, but I figured if I pretended I did, I could at least go down the rabbit hole of like, how would an A-list composer pitch for this show? So I made a list of composers that I thought of that might be scoring a show like this. And I was like, Bear McCreary, Lauren Balfe was on that list as well. And I was like, how would they do it? Well, maybe they might hire a full orchestra and do this whole thing. And I was like, I can't really afford to do that in the US or in London, but there's a Budapest orchestra and they do half an hour increments to record. And so it's like, oh, and you get a video too. So now it was in the realm of possibility. Still a significant chunk of savings, still a crazy
Right.
idea, but at least it wasn't like completely not doable. So I recorded this piece with the Budapest Orchestra, and then I sent it out to the team, and I got some nice responses back from kind of some of the lower level production people and everything, and that was kind of as far as it went. And then I tweeted it out with the hashtag Twitter of Time, and the Twitter of Time community is just amazing, and they took it and ran with it. And so then Tour.com actually ended up doing a whole article on it, and that's when yeah, it was incredible. And I actually so I found Brandon Sanderson on Reddit, and so I messaged him on Reddit, and he like responded back to it's crazy. So then Lauren ended up seeing that article, and he heard about this thing. So he's like, "Hey, why don't you maybe we could throw some work your way. Here's like 2 days to do two Wheel of Time trailers, including edits and changes, like 5 minutes worth of music." And it was like, talk about being thrown into the deep end, and that
Yeah.
somehow went well. And so they're like, okay, let's do another week or so, and here's four variations we want for Lawrence themes for his Dark Materials season 3. Go, and I'm like, when should I get this to you? And they're like, as soon as possible. And so I like rush through, and I like somehow do it. And then they're like, oh, here's another 4 minutes of music. We need that by tomorrow, 8 a.m. It's like 8 p.m. the previous night. It's like just trial by fire kind of stuff. But somehow I survived. And then, that kind of developed into a working relationship. And he asked me to join the team full time as an additional composer on various TV shows. So I worked on couple of his docu-series. There was a Victoria's Secret Angels and Demons, was like a docu-series on Hulu. Then I ended up working on his Dark Materials season 3, and then Life on Our Planet, which is beautiful nature docu-series on Netflix. And one of the few places you could use a live orchestra, which is really nice. It's like on big TV shows, it's hard to find still the budgets for like a full live orchestra recorded in Abbey Road, or at Air Studios in London. Like that's like the dream. Yeah. So a lot of these shows you don't get a chance to record full orchestras necessarily because the budgets just don't dictate it. So it was a very wonderful kind of unique experience. And then of course the Wheel of Time season 2. So I started off as an additional composer, purely just kind of adapting Lawrence themes, and then maybe writing a cue or two of my own that was like wholly original material.
Mm.
And it was funny because when I would send him cues for approval, because it would have to go through various stages of approval, it would go through Lauren first, then the music editor, the editor, the production, then Rafe Judkins, and then Amazon. So every cue had to go through this, approval process, which is kind of how they, made sure that it checked everything that they wanted in the particular scene and everything. But it was funny when I would send Lauren emails with the cues for approval. I would mention, hey, I can see foreshadowing based on the fact that book 4 is going to be in season 3. So why don't we tease this musically or whatever. And so there was at one point an opening for a music team lead of season 2. So I got a chance to be the music team lead, which was like a full circle moment, really. So part of my job was, in addition to working on, maybe I think I worked on writing or arranging maybe 40, 45 cues for that season 2. I also worked with the production to kind of make sure that the season was going according to schedule musically, and that everything is, what should be live recorded, what do we have the budget to do. So it was a great learning experience as well, kind of being in the hot seat without being in the hot seat, so to speak.
It's incredible to hear that, just like Hail Mary gamble, and you just ran with it so well. It's awesome to hear how that worked out for you. That's so cool.
Thanks.
So that actually kind of really nicely takes me to a question I wanted to ask you, where like I always find like fantasy storytelling, all it does is open more doors creatively. Like
Mm,
all you do is you can tell greater stories, you can get into themes more nuanced, deeper. Every fantasy element should serve a purpose. Musically, when you're scoring for a fantasy TV show, does it encourage you to kind of be more alternative, bombastic, exploratory, or do you find you kind of have to fold back into like the more traditional influences that have already like had such big impact on how like the
mm.
fantasy genre is perceived sonically, so to say?
Well, that's actually a really good question. I think from a storytelling perspective, especially modern fantasy, has kind of proven that fantasy is a canvas that you can paint on. You can have horror fantasy, you can have sci-fi fantasy, you can have like lighthearted slice of life fantasy, coming of age fantasy. It could be anything. And one thing that I learned from working on the Wheel of Time, and I've been trying to incorporate into my own either fantasy or non-fantasy scores, is musical world building
Mm.
and using non-traditional instruments. You know, for example, in the Wheel of Time season 1 and 2, I believe, we used a carnix, which is this ancient Celtic horn that's 6 feet tall and needs to like a whole auditorium to be rented to record the acoustics of this
Oh my
magnificent
God.
instrument. Or bone flutes and like things that are like ancient instruments. You can use them because when people think about them, they can't really place where they're from.
Mhm.
And so it is transportive in its own way. Like even in I kind of side tangent, but just to illustrate this point further, I'd worked on a horror film called Dead Whisper last year, and it takes place in Cape Cod, but it has a lot of fantastic kind of supernatural elements. And I found this Thai instrument as I was scrolling on Instagram, as one is want to do. Finally, it actually paid off because I found this instrument called the can, which is a bamboo instrument. It's like a vertical bamboo instrument that you play like this and you blow into. And I didn't know how to play it. I'd never seen it before. So I bought it, of course, from Thailand and tried to learn some rudimentary phrases. And it became the sonic identity of the score. But when
Wow.
you hear it, it's like this is a traditional instrument. So it's been played the same for hundreds or even thousands of years. So there's a whole universe of sounds you could tap into. And whenever people hear it, because it's been recontextualized, people don't go, oh, that reminds me of Thailand. They go,
Mhm.
oh, what is that? I've never heard that before. Or I've never heard that in this context before. And suddenly you have a unique world building device.
So you're a Wheel of Time fan, which is going to make this kind of a fun question to dive into.
Yeah,
There's a lot of nuances that the real Watt nerds are aware of. It's actually sci fantasy. There's all kinds of post apocalyptic stuff going on.
right.
Have you had to like kind of, has the team been aware of these things and you've kind of just been able to like play and have fun with people who are well aware of like, yeah, let's throw in this kind of more electric sound over here that fits? Or has there been a lot of like, feedback from the studios, like, what the hell is going on here? And you have to be like, listen, I promise it makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I think even at the very beginning of that process, and I'm just speaking from as a third party here, but I remember hearing that Lorne and Rafe had had a lot of conversations about not wanting to make it a traditional fantasy score, and
Yeah.
so they settled on this idea of, oh, what if we had Cajun music influences and bluegrass music influences, electric guitar, like you mentioned, and less of the big bombastic orchestra, except for certain key moments, like the Nynaeve dream sequence in season 2, I think episode 3, I want to say, with the Trolloc attack and everything. I'll just leave it at that, spoiler free, in case anyone. I don't want to ruin anything, but
We're good. If my audience, they're caught up. You're
okay,
good.
okay,
Feel
cool.
free to speak free. You're fine.
Yeah, so a lot of that was trying to use non-traditional instruments, and so I think from even the get-go, that was a conscious choice. And because of that, it allowed us to kind of go in different territory. Oftentimes there wasn't necessarily a specific instrument choice that had to be in a particular scene. It might have to do somewhat with a character. Like voice was used quite a bit. Abby Lyons did some amazing vocals on Moraine's theme, I think Egwene's theme, if I remember correctly, and a bunch of others. Great singers all
Mhm.
that were involved. And so, since vocals were a big part of it, maybe if it was an Egwene's theme, then probably would have some sort of a vocal aspect to it. But beyond that, we really had free reign.
Mhm.
So that we would use kind of processed synths and stuff. Even on the Egwene collaring scene, I think in season 2, which was one of the ones I had to tackle, I took Egwene's theme and pitch shifted it and warped it because she's kind of being um, just like the whole idea of her collaring is just like such a twisted take on her, kind of loss of freedom and
Yeah.
everything too. And so that could make it a little creepy to take her, that vocal that would usually be used in the Egwene's theme, and then slow it down and pitch shift it and do weird stuff with it. So there was, I think, maybe not consciously the sci-fi fantasy aspect of it, but the ability to go like, we don't need to stick with the regular fantasy tropes.
Right.
I think that made it both easier and maybe more difficult.
Well, yeah, because like freedom can be overwhelming, and it sounds like you guys are kind of entering that territory of if anything's possible, you're kind of going, well, then we could. There's a billion choices we could make here.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Yeah. I always feel, and I would love to know your thoughts on this as well. Is I feel personally from music, limitation can be extremely liberating actually, because when you have a confine of something to work in, you go, okay, even within that, there's actually limitless
Yeah,
possibilities.
I think that's true in a lot of creative senses. Whether it's like the fastest I've ever written a book is when someone told me, "Here's the plot of like everyone's writing a similar thing. We're just having everyone do a spin on it. Go." And it's like, "Oh, okay." And I bang that out in an afternoon, right? Because
Mm,
it's just so okay. We're doing this thing. Whereas, if I'm writing the next book in a series, I'm going to question everything. I'm going to take 6 hours to write a sentence. It's too much.
yeah,
And even with video editing, which I would there's a whole other angle of like your hobbies are both things where you're editing, and so you and I could get in the details of like audio stuff, editing,
sure.
but like I think no one would want to hear about that. So that'll be a private conversation we'll have
Good point.
later.
Yeah, yeah.
You talked about how like there's specific cues that you'll do for like a twisted moment, and I know you guys have been developing themes and sounds for certain characters. You have Forsaken to the Children of the Light. So many different moral complexities that Robert Jordan was trying to weave into his storytelling, and music is storytelling. Have you found a lot of like personal, are you excited to like tackle Children of the Light? Like how are you going to bring that sound, that holier than thou corruption to the audience, or like which aspect of that storytelling is like stuck with you the most?
That's a really good question. So for me, as far as like say Children of Light as a theme is considered, those particular ones were oftentimes Lauren would, write a beautiful melody for something like that, and have some specific ideas on vision of, we want this to feel like the juxtaposition of two disparate elements or something like that, right? And then it would be our job to kind of fully realize that vision, whether it be in the production aspect of it, like kind of, what kind of synths to use to do that, or where to have the vocal choir, and kind of how big we want to make a moment, things like that. Then in the context of a scene, it would be something different. So that's why in a lot of ways, when you hear the soundtrack albums, they're kind of like the greatest hits versions of those cues, and some of these cues are combined, in the albums to make it more of a listening experience. So in those, you hear them more bombastic anyways, whereas as you notice in the show, a lot of those layers are stripped back because you don't want to get in the way of dialogue, but you also want to tease a theme maybe. So it might even be just like a single couple of layers or something like that, and saving the bigger moments for, maybe more of an action sequence or a very poignant moment where nobody's really talking too much, but you're kind of, you know, in that moment with them. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question,
No,
but
no, you're
if that
totally
makes
good. And
sense, yeah.
it transitions me really nicely because you talked about production into, I imagine, what had to be like the most Herculean task from your perspective to take on, which is what your shirt is broadly advertising, the hills of Tenchico.
Yeah.
Because in your interview with Matt, which is a wonderful interview, by the way, you guys talked about how you worked with the actors. You had to, from beginning to end, work in the performances, the smaller minutia of Elaine's lack of confidence versus like the realization and then her growing more and more. At what point were you stopped with like creative input? Were you like on set that day saying like, hey, this will work? Or like, did you at some point have to let it go and just hope that it like turned out the way you'd envisioned? Where was like the creative, how in the hills were you is what I'm trying to get
I will never get tired of plays on words when it comes to that.
at.
So this is really illustrates the speed at which TV deadlines go. So I remember a particular day where they had sent lyrics. Rami Park had written the episode, and she wrote the lyrics for Hills of Tenchiko, and they had mentioned they want a sea shanty kind of a sound, but hey, Tenchiko is such a unique location, let's try to incorporate even Southeast Asian, Malaysian instruments, East African instruments, and really try to make it a confluence of sounds. Have fun. And and so Lauren was like, hey, you could take this on yourself, and so I was really grateful he gave me that opportunity, because he didn't have to do that, and so I felt very grateful that he let me kind of run with it. And then I had that morning to basically come up with the whole thing.
That's just nuts to me.
So it was insane. So I just sat here with my guitar, and started kind of trying to figure out the rhythmic cadences of the lyrics. And I just love like fantasy in-world music, and it's one of the things that I loved about the the books. You know, is Robert Jordan always had this ability to make the in-world music also feel very much like his own world, you know.
Yeah.
And that was something I've been looking forward to seeing more in the show. So the chance for it to try to capture that was like, oh, this is like my favorite kind of thing. And so yeah, it was, you know, I tried to think about it many different ways, and I figured since sea shanty is like a big important part of it, it should feel like a bard song. That should be the centerpiece, and the supporting elements, just because you don't want to have everything be the centerpiece, so the supporting elements would be the plucked Malaysian instruments, the East African percussion. That could kind of be kind of the rhythmic aspects of the track, and then the sea shanty aspect of it could be more front and center. And so I just added some claps in, all of that stuff I did that morning. So basically the entire bed of the track minus the vocals was done that morning. And then I got one note back from percussion from production. Oh, maybe we could use a little bit more of the plucked Malaysian instruments up front. So there was a few moments where those kind of come up, in the middle, and then that was it. And they're like, okay, we record with the actors in a couple days, so are you available this day? And they were recording in Prague, so I had to do a remote session, and so I got a chance to just run the session, which was both exciting and terrifying. And Marta Cunningham, who was the director of the episode, and Rami Park was also there in the studio room. So I got a chance to chat with them a little bit, and then each actor came in one by one. So Kira was first, and we were kind of trying to figure out the best way to attack the song because, we had a limited amount of time. They're going to be filming to this song presumably within just a few days, and so we wanted to, everything was going at a lightning pace. But the idea was like, okay, we probably just given the cadence of where this song is going to go from start to end, where we want this character's arc to be, she should sound a bit more hesitant at the very beginning and then kind of get more confident as it goes through, right? As she realizes what the Hills of Tenchiko is really about, and then kind of just leaning into it. But it kind of worked out serendipitously because it's like when a singer's singing, the first couple takes are just going to be more hesitant by default because they're warming up, they're kind of getting into it, and then the latter takes were more confident. So it kind of worked out. So we used a little bit of the beginning, a little bit of the end, and kind of comped that together. And then Donalfin came in, and he came in for the reprise, so he added his vocals on top, and he's just an incredible singer as well. And so he laid it down in like 15 minutes, and he was out. He
Wow.
just like two takes, and it was over, And even the second take was really a safety at that point. And then Alexander Willem came in, and I just love the grittiness to his voice,
Mhm.
and so it just added something to that reprise as well. It's like it's not only just the voices themselves, but how they sound together that really makes a difference. And I just love Kira's voice, just beautiful voice, and then Donald Finn's is nice, powerful accompaniment to it, and then I felt like Alexander's voice was kind of the icing on the cake because it blends the two really well together. So and then after that, it was like I sent stems over to production. Stems are basically like instrument
Mhm.
groups, and they combined it with the vocals. I kind of gave them a rough idea of where I wanted the vocals placed, and they combined it with the vocals and mixed it, and that was it. But really, it all happened lightning speed. And I also feel very grateful because at that time I was writing on 5 shows simultaneously.
Good
Because Lauren
God.
always, yeah, oh, it was crazy. It was insane. I didn't sleep a lot, but but I was having the time of my life. But I was working probably 90 to 100 hours a week at that point because I was working on my own projects as well. So yeah, and 3 of the 5 shows were live recording at the same time. So it's always the hurry up and wait thing in composing, in entertainment, I'm sure. So yeah, it was, but because of that, it was kind of, you get a chance to sharpen your tools a little bit more frequently, and so I think I was more equipped to just go, all right, we're doing this, and just kind of jump in.
I'm really glad I can tell you love what you do.
Oh, it's awesome. It's the best.
Well, so I want to. This is going to sound like kind of a goofy question, but I mean it in a very serious way. The tone of Hills of Tanchico is very specific. It's a song about tatas that is going to be sung in a tavern, but has a lot of energy to it and is kind of big in another way. But you had such a limited time to kind of hone in and find something that wouldn't just feel silly, but also was incredibly playful. What did you kind of draw on and look at to specifically try and make something with also instruments that sound like were kind of foreign to you? I mean, it sounds like you were juggling like 30 different titties here.
Yeah, it was a lot of juggling. Three's too many for sure. But yeah, no, it was interesting. I mean, a lot of these things, I think if I tried to think of each individual step, I'd probably lose my mind. So I just kind of jumped in and to see what would happen. But what I always love in kind of even bar songs, but I think in just songs in general, is when a chorus sounds very epic and almost like heroic. That's kind of what something that I really love in fantasy as well. So when you have kind of that main melody, like in this case, the Hills of Tanchico, when it sounds just like almost heroic, it's kind of a nice juxtaposition to the more bard song aspect of the verses,
Mm.
you know. And so that's really what I wanted to capture, is the juxtaposition, because right around when she starts singing the Hills of Tanchico, that's kind of when she starts to realize what it is and lean into it. So I was like, oh, that's kind of the perfect segue.
Mhm.
And so it just kind of worked out that how I like to write was very much in line with what the song needed, you know, which sometimes you have to kind of really force it. But because the nugget of the song was, and I always like doing this anyways, is trying to play a song over and over again until you get the melody just right,
Mhm.
you know, because I always feel like some of the notes that don't necessarily belong start to fall away at a certain point and things start to coalesce together. So I just sat there with my guitar and I just kept playing it over and over again until I had a very crystal clear melody. And then it made it easier to go, okay, I'm going to support that.
Mhm.
You know, I'm going to make that my A structure, and the B structure that supports it will be all these instruments, or you know, the percussion, the world instruments and everything. So then it felt easier to not lose sight of the bigger picture, I guess you could say.
And were there limitations that you were given as well? Like, hey, this is going to be happening in a bar. You can't have like 30 different horns going off because that won't make, like, what were the like feedback you had in terms of like, it can't be that big, you know?
Yeah, well, I would just say, like, you know, I knew it was a bar song, so automatically I was trying to make it feel a bit more homegrown,
Mhm.
you know, and so some of the percussion at the beginning is more stomps and claps of me here, just recording myself over and over, clapping. And and so you know, part of it was that, I think. Also, some of the instruments that they described, more of the folky stuff, was more single instruments, you know. So I just imagine that it probably wouldn't be something that would be too big, because then it would start to take you out of it. And I think the way it was expertly weaved by the on the dub stage with the particular layers, because if you listen to the album version, it sounds more full,
Mhm.
and in the TV, you know, in the episode version, it starts off much more tentative, and the instruments start to creep in about midway through the song. And so it kind of works for the medium, you know. And so it is a little bit of a juggling act.
Yeah. Oh,
You kind of have to make sure that you're exercising restraint as much as you're shooting for it.
if you don't mind me saying, this is the first time I've ever interviewed someone about music, but it's so interesting to me that there's a parallel to authors where, like, if I try and get an author to really get into like the minutia of their prose, they're like, I can't do that. And if I try and get you to be like, what about this choice? You're like, don't make me think about it. It's just, I feel it, I do it, it
Totally,
works, we're
totally.
done.
Yeah, I always feel like I remember I was watching an interview with Vince Gilligan from Breaking Bad, you know, and he was talking about how many times people would ask him, like, even on set, they were like, "Oh, did you do this because it was going to connect to this?" He was like, "I just thought it sounded cool," you know, and it's like that's kind of part of the fun, is maybe there's a way to connect those dots, but it also is maybe the spontaneity of creation at the same time.
And do you have a ballpark estimate to how many instruments you've had to work on with Wheel of Time?
Might be easier to say how many I haven't had to work. No, I would say, gosh, I mean, at least, I mean, so some of the stuff I live recorded, some of the stuff I worked with live musicians, and then some of the stuff I
Right.
would work with sample libraries, which are kind of like recordings of, you know, the way sample libraries are basically recorded. Just to get little technical for a quick second, is, you know, let's say there's a violin sample library, so the violinist goes in the studio, records a short note, a medium note, a long note on one particular string, then the next one, and then different dynamics and everything. And this is all put into a UI that you could play this stuff on the keyboard. So oftentimes I'll do a lot of the mock-ups and stuff like that here, or it's a combination thereof. So if you're counting all those instruments, probably at least, gosh, 40, 50.
Good Lord. Sounds like your job in a lot of ways is just to learn as fast as you can as you go. It seems like you are just trying to, get fundamentals down so you can capture a sound, put something together, make it fit the world, and move.
100%. Yeah. But I think like also what I've started to realize from this job is one doesn't need to be an expert in that instrument. And oftentimes, even not being an expert can be a boon for the writing process because
Mhm.
you're not going to think about it in a traditional way. Like, for example, that Thai can instrument, if I'd learned the ins and outs of how to play it traditionally, I wouldn't have been able to recontextualize it. So it was precisely my terrible playing that was an asset for the production.
It wasn't terrible. It was Wheel of Time post-apocalyptic style of
Right, right.
playing
Of
the instrument.
course, of
How it's
course.
developed, of course, yes, through the ages.
We're just setting trends.
Yeah. So, and is there a specific, let's call it, without getting into spoilers, you are someone who's consumed the series. Is there a specific scene or sequence, whether it's Dumai's Wells or let's call it the great collaboration between a specific male and female channeler, that you, as someone who needs to like maybe capture that moment, are already kind of percolating on, hoping to get to season whatever so you can do it? Like, what's that moment that you're just like, I'll cut a head off to be able to compose this scene?
Oh man, I feel like it would be actually hard to pick a moment for the reason that there are so many epic moments that come right after this, you know?
Yeah.
I think Dumai's Wells would be an incredible one. I think also a specific, I think it could be really interesting because and Elida has kind of also evolved in the context of the show compared to
Mhm.
how she's present in the book. So I'm curious to see where that storyline goes. But kind of that storyline in was it Gathering Storm or something? I forget. I don't want to like spoil anything, so I'm trying to.
We're at the near the end here. I'm just going to say full book spoilers for people. So if you have not finished the books, fuck right off. We're going to start talking about book spoilers. You're good to
It
go.
was the first Brandon Sanderson book, so I think it was book 12. And
Mhm.
kind of like how her story basically ends, where we last see
Gotcha.
her. I think that would be really interesting just because it's such a like it's like so mentally twisted and it's also about getting a comeuppance that was a long time coming. So I think that would be really interesting.
That specific assault I've always kind of seen as like one of the most tragic in Wheel of Time because it's the fundamental faults in that organization that we've seen building for so long finally coming to a head, and a price being paid
Yeah,
that is so brutal,
yeah, yeah.
that I've always kind of seen that as a very tragic moment. So I don't know, who knows how it'll actually be. Maybe they'll be doing electric guitars. I'm not sure.
Right, right.
Um, but yeah, so that's it. I mean, for me, I've always thought like however you guys are going to be able to capture the sounds around the Dark One's prison, like in the cave. That's kind of the time where I'm like, oh
Oh
my,
yeah.
like you could just totally go balls to the wall, weird, distorting reality. The sound design already around Landfear making the boar was spectacular, and what the score was doing there just really made that shot land right. Like you have to play with both senses. The visuals were there, and then it was just backed up by this boom that just felt so appropriate. So kudos.
That's awesome. Yeah, yeah, I know. I think it's always interesting too to see, especially in a show like Wheel of Time, and I think in fantasy in general is like the line between music and sound effects really starts
Oh
to
yeah.
blur actually because
I assume you're just talking to the sound design team all the
yeah,
time
yeah,
because you
it's
guys are essentially playing two tracks.
well, yeah, I mean, a lot of it becomes at the stage that we had gotten the cuts to start working on music for. A lot of the themes were being developed before then, well before then. But when we were getting the cuts, we already kind of had some sound effects in, so we could write around them because that's always the juggling act. Is in a big
Mhm.
moment, oftentimes there's a big sound effect, and you don't want the music to get lost, and you also don't want to try to overshadow the sound effect. So
Yeah.
sometimes you'll notice like before a big explosion or something, just as an example, you'll hear the music stop right before there, rather than going through that moment because you want to make that moment matter and you're kind of building to that moment. So it is a technical process of like the dance between these mediums.
Just to make me jump out of my seat all the harder when it
Yeah,
hits. Thank you. I
exactly.
appreciate
Whatever I can
that.
do to help, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And if I could end this with a request, if it's too much, I completely understand. But if you guys could get the rights to Peekaboo by Kendrick Lamar and put it in the show when Landfear pops up, that would just make my whole life worth it. So I just could ask that. If I don't know if you're aware of that joke from my watch-alongs, every time she's come up, she has popped into the screen. I don't think the actress who plays Landfear has walked into screen once normally. It
No,
has
no.
always been a Peekaboo moment, and you guys need to get Peekaboo. It's the perfect fit. I'm just gonna put that out there.
I'll bring it up at the next staff meeting, you know?
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, everyone, please go ahead and check out both channels here. Your first is just your name, and the second is Shelf Centered, I believe, correct?
Shelf esteem.
Self esteem, sorry. Shelf esteem. I just burned a bridge. Don't worry about it. And thank you so much for being willing to come on and talk about this incredibly important angle to the creative process to the Wheel of Time show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Daniel. Like, since I've been watching your channel since like 2019 and seeing, helped me develop my love of Wheel of Time. So I'm so grateful that you were, as I was mentioning earlier, instrumental, pun intended, in making this happen, man.
Well, hey, I'm learning to play piano right now, so I'm going to be trying to get some of your tunes down. I'll try and get I'll send you if I manage to get through one correctly.
Oh, please, I would love to hear that anytime.
It's going to sound like ass. I want to make that clear. All right, well, thank you so much everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.